This episode was live streamed to an online audience at anxietyfitness.com. Welcome to Anxiety Fitness, the show where each week I chat with mental health professionals and people with lived experience to hear real stories, practical insights, and the tools that actually help us to live comfortably and confidently in the face of uncertainty. In this episode, I'm joined by Phil Lane, a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and author. We talk about overcoming panic attacks, the importance of psychoeducation, and so much more. Phil even shares his personal experiences of panic and anxiety. Let's begin. Hello, Phil. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Hello, Peter. I'm doing well. It's great to see you, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really glad to have you here, and I'm excited, really to just dive into it. So, I was talking about the books you wrote, and I just want to ask, what was it that led you to write these books? And we can start with overcoming panic and panic attacks.
Sure. Both books were written because they're things that I've lived through. And as I was going through my own challenges with illness, anxiety, and panic, I wish that I'd had more resources. So I'm privileged enough to be in a position as a clinical social worker that I'm able to, write a manuscript and have a publisher publish it. So really, both were born of lived experience. I know how uncomfortable both panic and illness anxiety are. And so it's very important for me to not only share that if you're going through it, you're not alone, but also to be able to put out into the world some helpful information that can help people cope with it.
Yeah, and so you're a therapist, right? And you've actually lived through the experience of panic and panic attacks. Are you comfortable to talk a bit more about your experience?
Sure, of course.
Maybe we can start with your experience of panic. When was the first time that you started experiencing symptoms of panic, or maybe can you remember the first time that you had a panic attack, for example?
I can remember the first time vividly. I was probably, I want to say, about 25 or 26 years old, and it was while I was driving, which was very, very frightening. I'd never had a panic attack before in my life. I had no idea what was happening. I started to feel extremely uncomfortable, heart palpitating, all those very commonly experienced panic symptoms. And I, like many other people who go through something like that, went to the emergency room of the hospital, and I was told that I was fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You're completely fine. But which didn't make sense at the time. But yeah, that was the first one. And I know that when I speak to other folks who go through panic, it's very common that they may end up in the hospital because it is so physically uncomfortable and so physically distressing.
That's my story. I don't have a count, but I could probably look it up in my records somewhere. But there was a period where I actually was calling ambulances every single day, and sometimes twice a day. I would call an ambulance, get checked out, go home, and as soon as I went home, I'd get all the symptoms again, and I would say, "Oh, they must have missed something. I need to get back to the hospital." And it was a terrible, situation. And I think that it actually is probably more common than we think that people end up in the hospital or the emergency room thinking that something dangerous is happening, right? Because it does feel so dangerous. Do you think that having gone through that experience has helped you in your line of work?
Yeah, very much so, because I now at this point in my life can differentiate between a panic related symptom and something that would signal a medical emergency. But much like you, I could not make that differentiation when I was going through panic very, very intensely and very acutely. And one of the things that has helped me greatly is just educating myself on panic and how it works. And that's another reason that I've written the books, is that I feel when we start to understand the mechanics of these challenges, the biology, the neurobiology of them, they start to have less power over us.
That's right. And one of the things that I think definitely helped me was understanding what actually is happening in the body. So maybe for people listening who have just experienced their first panic attack or are just dealing with their first kind of symptoms, do you have any advice for people who are just starting to realize that these feelings might be something to do with anxiety or panic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand that there are 4 panic attack subtypes, and there are 4 different areas of the body. There's a gastrointestinal subtype, which may provoke nausea or feelings that you're going to be sick or having to use the restroom. There's a vestibular subtype, which has to do with, I believe vestibular would be the heart, right? So the heart, cardiac tightness, those sorts of things. There's a respiratory subtype. So some folks will experience shortness of breath, which can lead to dizziness. And what is the 4th subtype? That's probably going to escape me right now. But there is a 4th subtype. But I guess the simpler way to put it is that it's good to know where in the body these types of symptoms typically manifest. If you read the criteria for diagnosis in the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association's manual, you'll find that many of these symptoms appear in the chest, in the heart, in the head. So it's good to know where in the body these tend to occur.
Okay, I see. Yeah, and to be honest, with me, I've probably felt, during panic attack, I felt every almost possible physical symptom that you can think of, and it's so hard to. The hardest part for me was believing that this was a panic attack or this was anxiety, because when you have a panic attack, as you don't think you're having necessarily a panic attack, even if you've had hundreds before. You think, oh, this is a heart attack because I can feel my chest is tight. I can feel it's beating so hard. There's palpitations. I've got chest pain. It's unbelievable how just convincing it is. And I'm sure you know that during the panic attack, it almost feels as if the logic goes out the window. Do you know why that happens to people? It's like, I can tell you, when I have a panic attack, I might have a racing heart, but it's just because of this is happening and the adrenaline is going. But when it happens, no, forget that. I'm dying.
And that's the reason that the logic goes out the window, because of adrenaline and the rush of cortisol, the body's stress hormone. The nervous system is overriding any sort of logic that could be happening. It's very difficult to access any rational thinking in that moment because you are in such discomfort.
Right. So during a panic attack, is there a way to get back to rational thinking, or do you just have to ride it out?
Well, I think it's riding it out and also not doing too much, which may sound strange, but as human beings, we have a tendency to want to troubleshoot and problem solve, diagnose and find the solution. And a panic attack is an uncomfortable, call it 5 to 10 minutes, if you think about it in terms of how at its most acute. It typically doesn't last much longer than that. So within that 5 or 10 minutes, the only thing you really need to do is stop and slow down, start to take a series of deep breaths. But I think that that's counter to what we think we need to do when we're believing that there's an emergency happening. So it's really difficult to slow down when panic is happening, but it's actually the antidote to panic, because panic rushes and it goes very, very quickly. If you can slow down, whether that's through deep breathing or it's through just sitting and being still, you will come back to rational thinking.
That makes sense, because sometimes almost for me there becomes a point of a surrender where it just gets to a point and you believe that it's going to go on forever, and you're trying to find out every different thing to do to try and make it go away, or acting on your instinct, just trying to survive. But almost when I get to that point of just letting the heart race on, that's when I start to realize that, okay, these symptoms can happen. They can happen, and I can go over there and take a seat, or you start realizing that, hold on a second, I actually can go and do something, even though I'm feeling these intense feelings. And you start to realize that it maybe it can go away, maybe it will go away, and then it probably does. And so that's one thing that I noticed just through my experience with panic attacks.
But if you rush to the hospital, or if you call an ambulance, you won't arrive there, right?
Yeah, it's sometimes what would happen to me as well is I would call an ambulance. The ambulance would arrive, and because they arrived, my symptoms would go away. So they'd hook me up to the
Right.
machine and say,
Right.
"You're perfectly fine. Your heart's 60 beats a minute." That's because you're here, and I know that if anything were to
Yes.
happen, you would keep me safe. So therefore, all those symptoms are going away. And as I said before, it became a point where I literally was unfortunately calling ambulances all the time, not because I knew they were going to calm me down. I genuinely believed I was dying at that time, and I felt very guilty when they did arrive. But you know, but unfortunately, and what would happen is I would calm down when they did arrive. But there's a caveat there, because after that was happening for a while, their reassurance stopped being enough, right, to help me. So maybe we'll talk a bit about reassurance as a kind of anxiety panic habit. Is that something helpful? Because it feels helpful.
It depends on whether it's done in what we would term an adaptive or a healthy way, or a maladaptive or an unhealthy way. The way
Mhm.
that the diagnostic criteria breaks down is that the two typical responses to health anxiety are care seeking and care avoidance. So for some individuals, they may avoid medical settings completely because that may be where they find out this catastrophic news that something is horribly wrong with me. And if you do that, you sort of suffer in silence. But on the other hand, if you're care seeking, you're seeking a ton of medical reassurance. You're perhaps undergoing medical tests that are not needed. Maybe you're spending a lot of money out of pocket in order to get medical care that you
Mm,
actually don't need. Reassurance. We all need reassurance as human beings, but if we rely on it, and that's what happens with illness anxiety, we start to become
yeah.
reliant on it. And in my case, very similar to you, I had, been to the hospital countless times, and that started to not reassure me
Yeah.
anymore. So then I started to seek out
Yeah.
specialists. I would be like, all right, well, this seems to be in my
Right.
chest, so I better go see a cardiologist. Or this seems to be, my stomach seems to be off, I better go see a gastroenterologist. And so the care seeking sort of just became a more specific type of care seeking.
Yeah. I think the dream for people with specifically health anxiety as well, maybe panic attacks as well, is that you can just have your own personal doctor who can just test you all the time, forever, on every different condition, every different symptom. Just call them, hey, I'm feeling something today, or just be permanently hooked to monitoring machines. And that was something that I was actually wishing could happen for me. I was like, why can't I just get this heart monitor and just have it forever? I'll feel much better if I have it on because it'll alarm me if something bad happens, right? So I couldn't deal with that uncertainty at the moment. And that's a key point as well that I think we should touch upon is the idea of just this intolerance of uncertainty and what role that plays in how we feel and respond. So what can you tell us about
Well,
uncertainty itself?
yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'll go back a step just to add that our physical health is very precious, and it is common to
Yeah.
be mindful of it and to have it on our minds. So one of the first things we need to do, if I'm looking at this from a treating somebody with illness anxiety, is we have to be very empathetic and understanding that, yeah, the behavior might be somewhat irrational, or the behavioral response might be an over response, but the thing that underlies it is something that is actually fragile, which is our physical health. We can get sick, we can become injured. So as far as the uncertainty goes, sometimes we just forget that for the most part, we're pretty safe. Like you and I are talking right now, and both of our bodies are functioning exactly as they should. And we don't even need to think about it. Our blood is pumping as it should. Our lungs are doing their thing. But we're extremely uncomfortable in uncertainty, and it's very uncertain when you experience a physical symptom that you cannot pinpoint what the cause is. That feels so uncertain and therefore so frightening.
One of the one of the things that I noticed was not that I wanted to get some kind of diagnosis about having a heart disease, for example, because a lot of my worry was around the heart. But I would go into the hospital and I would come out, they'd tell me I'm fine, and I would almost feel frustrated. One, because I didn't feel fine, so there was like a disconnect of, I don't feel okay, so there's doubt on what they told me. But then partly there was a bit of disappointment because I didn't have an explanation good enough for me. Maybe I did have an explanation. They could say it's anxiety, for example, but that wasn't good enough for me because anxiety cannot make you feel like you're having a heart attack. Reasonably, is the kind of thinking I was having. So the point I was getting with this is that I wanted almost to be told, here's something wrong, so we can now fix everything that you're experiencing. Because I couldn't tolerate all these symptoms. I needed to find an answer for every symptom. If I had a headache, for example, I couldn't just take a paracetamol and make it go away, because that headache to me was a sign that something's wrong with my body. We have pain for a reason. It means something's wrong. So I could never sit with even an inkling of, maybe not. I would have to say, what is the reason I feel this, and figure it out. And I never found out that reason. But now I'm very proud that I'm actually able to sometimes have a pain or a chest pain or something and just go, okay, that's the difference, right? I still don't have an answer all the time, right? But how can we do that?
Well, you're a great example of it, because you've come to a point, and I'm a great example of it too, because I think you and I have both come to a point where we can say to ourselves, there is not an answer for every single physical symptom, and that is okay. Not every single physical symptom signifies something much larger or a larger systemic problem. You didn't want a diagnosis necessarily, you just wanted an answer. And you, much like I, didn't like the answer of, it could be anxiety, because then I'd be like, well, okay, so now what? What do I do now? Anxiety? What do I do? I didn't know. I was not a therapist at the time, by the way. I went back to school a few years later. So I was not in the mental health field. I didn't really know how panic and anxiety worked. But that was my earlier point, that as I started to understand how these things worked, and I did my own sort of I read a ton of books on anxiety. I read all sorts of things, because that was my way of getting an answer. And I started to slowly feel better as I gained a working understanding and a working knowledge of what is anxiety, how does it work. I would read about, again, I wasn't in the mental health field, but I would read about like how the autonomic nervous system works. But it helped me to understand what's going on inside of me when I have those feelings.
Yeah, I would say I've learned a bit about the the nervous system and sympathetic, parasympathetic, and learning about that stuff really especially does make a difference. Even just one thing I do is I always talk about this idea of surrendering, but sometimes it means just exhaling, for example. And so when I feel anxiety rising up, I know that let's call it, I would say the sympathetic, so the fight or flight, is going to want to do a sharp and start getting ready to get the oxygen in. And so sometimes I notice that I start becoming tense, and I just really just get everything out, and just it's the opposite, isn't it? That's what you do when you relax. You lean, take a seat. And so learning about the nervous system, for example, and this is taught in therapy, isn't it? At least to a basic degree, helps you to get that foundation of what is actually happening here. Because again, anxiety, panic itself is very counterintuitive, because you want to do all the things
yes
that actually keep it running, isn't it?
Right. And it feels very, very mysterious when you first experience it. It's like this feeling from another planet. It's so alien and it's so strange. So as a therapist treating anxiety and panic, what we term in my field psychoeducation is very important. It's exactly the type of discussion that we're having, helping clients to understand, like, what fight or flight response is, what how the nervous system works, without this being like a neuroscience class. It's doing it in a simplistic way, but helping people to understand how these systems work together, how sometimes they're off kilter and therefore they cause the body to become confused. So that educational piece is extremely important, simply because the nature of anxiety and panic can feel so complex and so mysterious.
But how do we toe the line of wanting to get that information but not going into the obsession where you're Googling everything? To be honest, I might have a bit of a cardiology degree thanks to Dr. Google, for example. I know a lot more terms than I should. I know probably more about how the heart works than I should. And also, I think there's that kind of Dunning-Kruger effect there where, and I'll admit this, that because I know a little bit more and I've read like cardiology papers or things about the heart, but I know nowhere near as enough as someone who's a medical student or a doctor. And so knowing that little bit more gives me just enough fuel for more assumptions and doubts and panic attacks than if I perhaps was a doctor or an expert. So that's I'm going to use the word dangerous, but that's a bit dangerous when you obsess and become the expert on different parts of the body, for example, when you're not quite. And so it gives you a lot of fuel for the fight.
Right, but there's a difference between psychoeducation, like understanding the psychology of it, and simply inundating yourself in information about a particular symptom, right? Like psychoeducation, and I'll give you a great example. There was a point where I read a book called The Meaning of Anxiety. Highly recommended. It's by Rollo May, who was a psychologist around the time of the mid-century. And I had started to take a turn from just Googling, like, why is my heart pounding, to reading a book like The Meaning of Anxiety. And The Meaning of Anxiety helped me so much because it was talking about what was actually happening. The symptom was happening, but it was driven by the anxiety. I didn't need to understand the symptom. I needed to understand what underlied the symptom and what drove the symptom.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. And again, you don't need to know everything about the heart, for example, but just knowing that when you're anxious, some adrenaline or cortisol is released into the body, and this is going to speed up your heart, and your fight or flight response is essentially happening. Even for me, one of the biggest things, learning that a panic attack was just my fight or flight response happening at, let's say, an inappropriate time. Obviously, part of me was like, well, why is it going off when I don't need it? There must be something wrong with my brain. But at the same time, knowing that, well, actually, it means that my body is actually working. I'm just maybe interpreting things in a way that is not as useful, and that can be changed because people can change the way that you interpret what's going on around you. People change even their beliefs all the time, so that's something that I could do, and that's something that I think listeners as well can do. Is if you believe that panic is dangerous or that these symptoms are dangerous, and that's kind of would you call it a schema or something, that this means that doesn't necessarily have to be that way forever, even if it feels like it. And sometimes I think that we can have this set belief or set mindset and not even realize it, where everything is dangerous or every symptom is bad. And it helps you to get into that panic state more when that's not necessarily true.
Right. I mean, we also tend to we call it in psychology splitting. We tend to split into two very rigid categories, like good or bad. In terms of panic, it's safe or risky, right? So this is, and there's no in between when we're in that panicked state. And so the reason why mindfulness, for instance, is very important in healing from panic and anxiety is that it encourages you to embrace middle ground. Like what you're saying, you could have a headache and it could not mean anything. It could be that you've been looking at your screen for too long, or it could just be because you have a headache. There could be no actual thing that it really points back to. So being able to start to live in that middle ground is really, really important. So challenging that really all or nothing thinking, that I think what you're talking about is filtering. When everything comes through a filter of danger or risk, that's the way it's going to be processed in the brain, and the body reacts to what the brain processes.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting about yeah, the way that you kind of put terms to what I was describing, and that's the psychoeducation, isn't it? You realize, I think a lot of this
That's yes.
are things called cognitive distortions, right? So all or nothing
Mm-hmm.
thinking, black or white. I remember for me, the headache
Yep.
example, I'm going to go back to it. If I had a headache, there's no such thing as just a headache, and there was no such thing as even a headache from looking at a screen. To me, a headache was brain bleeding, tumor in there that I don't know about. That was the only thing that a headache could mean to me, even though logically I knew that people get headaches. But no, for me it was headache means something 100% dangerous, and that is what I believed. And the difference for me now is that I can have a headache. So I think actually we might have some questions from people in the
Sure, I
community.
would love
So
that.
I can have a little look see. Let's have a look. So Kelvin asked about the subtypes. So is it random which subtype you get? I think that's with the panic subtypes. Or are certain subtypes linked to certain emotions underneath? That's a really
Wow,
interesting one.
what a wonderful question. My answer would be that they probably are not linked to a particular emotion. I think it just has to do with one's particular body physical makeup and where anxiety tends to inhabit. You can almost look at anxiety and panic as like living in certain places in your body. Like Peter said, for him it really lived in his chest. For me, it absolutely lived in my chest, and then also in my head quite often, because I would feel dizzy. So I don't believe that there's any research or psychological literature to show that it links to any particular emotion. My assumption would be that it's just unique to the individual. But so what that means, though, is that it's important for you, if you go through anxiety or panic, to know where your unique anxiety centers are, which I mentioned in the panic attack book. Like, I think there's an exercise in there about like pointing out your particular anxiety centers, like really knowing where is it that for me anxiety and panic manifest.
Do you know what page that exercise is?
I have no
Maybe we
idea.
can. Is it quick
I
to
was
go
telling
through?
Peter offline, I wrote a lot of this book at 4 a.m. in my son's nursery.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
oh,
It's
well, the subtypes are on page 9.
Let's have a look. I've got the book right here, everyone, if you're interested. Let's see if I can focus. Overcoming panic and panic attacks. And there actually are quite a few exercises and really amazing explanations. So, for example, just as you were mentioning, showing the body there, right? Um, and essentially, yeah, vestibular, cardiac, respiratory, gastrointestinal, so showing the anxiety throughout the different parts of the body, or the subtypes. And I think stuff like this is not really celebrated enough, to be honest. These kind of resources, right? It's something that's so easy to get your hands on, but sometimes when you're overwhelmed, when you're in a panic state, for example, it just doesn't come into your head to get a book, for example. So I know that was a case with me where it took me probably a couple of years of having panic attacks before I thought, hey, let me actually go and find something from someone who's been through this and written about it, or find from a doctor who's written about it. I was just so in what was happening at the time. And part of me also had this mindset of, well, if it's if it's so easy in a book, then I wouldn't, you know, that's my case is too bad, right? Books are for someone who's anxious of a school test coming up, right? But that is what I've learned, is that is really the farthest from the truth. So I've been getting much more into reading and finding like tools like this, and it actually can make incredible difference. So I will definitely leave a link. We'll leave a link in the chat and places in the description where you can actually find the books. But it'd be interesting to, because is it just the two you've written? So we have illness, understanding and coping with illness anxiety, and overcoming panic attacks. Is there any I'm missing?
There is a third. It's called the Narrative Therapy Workbook for Self-Esteem. So that is actually a guided workbook that you can work through, and it takes a narrative therapy approach, which is one of the modalities that I practice. That I'm not sure that it fits in so much with illness anxiety or panic attacks, but it certainly can be very helpful for building self-esteem, feeling better about yourself, investigating the story you tell about yourself. But yeah, that's
interesting, because I think there's probably could be a connection with things like self-esteem, because I don't know if it's directly self-esteem, but one of the things that bothered me with anxiety and panic was this idea that I cannot do anything, or I can't cope with anything. You really underestimate the ability to be able to cope with things, almost as if, you're not good enough, or everyone else is brave and I'm just. I used to say I had a scaredy cat disorder. I was just someone who was very scared and not able to cope with everything. Right. Well, that's what I used to say. I just used to say I had I think I said a scaredy cat or a coward disorder. I was just, that's what I felt like, right? I didn't feel like, I have a legitimate something, my nervous system or, my fight or flight response is going off. I didn't feel like that. I just felt like I'm just so scared, and everyone else is brave, and I'm almost worthless.
And boy, that would really. That's very heavy, but I always find it interesting, and I share this often with illness anxious clients. It was only in the 1980s, I believe the mid 1980s, that the name of the diagnostic criteria was changed from hypochondria to illness anxiety. And hypochondria really has a certain connotation of being a neurotic and being, maybe attention seeking. And, I'm doing this because I'm a histrionic person. And it was, the 1980s is, in the grand scheme of things, is not all that long ago. It took a very long time for psychology, at least in the United States, to change the languaging and the terminology about this. And we no longer see it that way. Maybe society does in some ways, but certainly in my profession, in the mental health profession, we do not see illness anxiety as a disorder of neurosis.
I think that's also why, let's say, the term hypochondriac is, I guess, fallen out of use, at least in I think medical and therapy fields, because it's now associated with. I did a video on health anxiety, and I remember seeing a comment, that's a hypochondriac. And, you have to explain that, well, this is actually illness anxiety disorder, hypochondriasis, or that's supposed to be the same exact thing. We just don't use that term anymore. At least I think, is that right? Am I right on that?
I don't know if the criteria has likely remained. Yeah, I don't know if the criteria is exactly the same, but it was hypochondriasis, and I don't know if any of that criteria has changed, but then the label has changed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe there's there could be a different criteria, but I think, as far as I know, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same kind of, just a different label, same, let's say, disorder, but it's become such a term now, hypochondriac, someone who's just going to the hospital for fun and always, feels like it's a negative term. I don't personally see it that negatively. Because I think it is.
I don't know if this changed also in the. Yeah, I don't know if this changed also in the 1980s, but there's a differential diagnosis. There's also a separate diagnosis called factitious disorder, which is when you fabricate an illness. And that's in order to elicit sympathy or there's almost a narcissistic element to that, but that is not at all illness anxiety. Yeah. So there are people
you do it on purpose?
Have a factitious, you do it on purpose, yeah. Yeah, there's even factitious disorder by proxy. People will do it. This is very rare, but they might do it through pretending their child is ill or pretending their pet is ill in order to elicit sympathy.
But even in my eyes, even to do that, there must be something else going underneath, because I wouldn't want to necessarily do that just for sympathy, but do it to that level. Maybe there's a personality disorder or something in that vein,
there's
where
something that has
it could be very difficult for the person. I don't know. So I've generally become very, very not maybe understanding of quite different situations that I might not understand, especially because of the way that sometimes people might have felt about me. I do remember one experience, and luckily most experiences of me going to the hospital, for example, have been really, really, the staff, they're very good, and a lot of them were very understanding. But there was the occasional paramedic in the ambulance that was a bit, let's just say, pissed off, and didn't take me seriously and thought I was wasting time. And I remember I was dealing with ectopic beats and having heart palpitations, and I would always, whenever I feel them, I do a little bit of a grunt and a cough, and it feels very uncomfortable. And to me, it's that uncomfortable. And the nurse was, I was in the room with the nurse, and they were doing like the vitals and stuff, and I was in there for palpitations, and I kept just going, oh, there's another one. And she just looked at me with disgust and said something like, oh, stop it, stop it. You having it, like, but in a way of mocking what I was doing. And I felt so almost, she was saying I was putting on a show so that the doctors would believe me, right? And I wanted to say that I'm not doing this on purpose. This is just, it hurts. This is what I feel. And there was still that stigma there. And that really made me feel even a little bit unsafe. And, but luckily that was the minority of situations that happened, but it was there.
There is shame involved in illness anxiety. Unfortunately, I have a story much like that. I was probably in my late 20s, and I had gone to the hospital. I was extremely uncomfortable. I know now that it was a panic attack, but I'd actually called my mother to come and meet me at the hospital. I just wanted somebody else to be there with me. And a nurse said to me, I'm not exaggerating, she said, "Oh, I see you needed your mommy to come." I was like, wow, whoa, that really hurt. Yeah, but to your point, Peter, it's the majority of medical professionals are empathetic, and they have an understanding of the psychology of some of these things. Not everybody has great bedside manner, but look, I think what I like to remind folks going through these kinds of challenges is you already feel, whether it's weak or silly or crazy or whatever it is, you already have all those self-negative feelings. So the last thing you need is for somebody to confirm those feelings about you, which is where therapy can be very helpful. I mean, this is how we should always be in our field, but empathy and understanding and humanization are very important, and they're really important for when you're going through something like panic or illness anxiety.
I agree. And I just had a thought as well, is that there's one, in my experience, one kind of medical professional who, field that I think does really well with panic, and I think that's dentists. Because my dentist, I don't know if it's because that's the one that people associate with people having panic attacks. Normally, everyone's scared of the dentist. Weirdly, I love the dentist. Right. And this is, people find this very strange. I absolutely love, I've had 2 root canals and I loved it. Right. Getting the injection is fine for me because they're so professional. They're just sitting there. They're so, you trust them, and laying back, even the drill and all the equipment, I'm kind of in peace. I fell asleep during the root canal because I felt like, wow, there's a doctor doing stuff. There's a professional doing stuff. But I mentioned that I had one dentist who did my root canal, and similar to what you said, I couldn't go places by myself. And I had my dad and my brother, I think even girlfriend at the time, had to come with me to go to the dentist and wait in the waiting room while I was there. And every time I went to the dentist, they always had to come, and they knew that that was the case, and they never said anything negative. They were completely understanding and treated me still like very human, like anyone else. And I noticed that, right? So this is something that I'm just saying for the sake of, maybe there's a professional listening, but I noticed that kind of response. So they acknowledged it, and they even would, ask nicely about, oh, how's my dad doing? Stuff like that. It was good to see your brother, for example. But they knew that, and because I told them as well that I couldn't really be there without it, and they were absolutely so amazingly understanding. And that's one of the things that when I did start getting better and being able to push myself more, knowing that people can be like that, helped me just to have a little bit more confidence in when I was going out into the world, knowing that there's people who understand. Does that make sense? It really makes
Of course. And oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. It's absolutely a driver for me wanting to put this kind of these kinds of books out into the world. Is, yeah, it's all well and good to get a therapeutic perspective, but I think it's important for you to know that the guy who wrote this also went through this. And as you read this information, it's hopefully going to feel very supportive to you. It's not going to feel clinical. I think that that's so important, because anxiety and panic and illness anxiety are very isolating feelings. When you are in that panic loop, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, there were some days where the only place I would go was to the hospital, and then I go back home, and I didn't want to go anywhere else. So I think it's really important that we have touch with others, that we have community around this. When we're struggling is when we need to not be isolated.
Today's episode was live streamed to an online audience at anxietyfitness.com. If you want to join future live podcast recordings, free workshops, support groups, or access tools and resources created by experts and mental health professionals, you can sign up at anxietyfitness.com for free. I think we can go through a few more questions from the audience as well. That's one of the great benefits of being able to do this live, is although their technical difficulties have a bit of a greater effect, we can still really engage with everyone. So let's have a look. And everyone in the audience, if you do have more questions, please feel free to go ahead and type away and ask any questions you have. Camille, is that right? I hope I'm saying that right. Camille says, and I think this is for you, Phil, but let me know if you want me to answer it as well. Asks, have you ever been, and Phil, if you're comfortable to answer this one, have you ever been on medications like an SSRI? I'd personally love to hear your perspective on medications as a therapist as well, and someone who's been through anxiety.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I proudly take an SSRI. I have for many years. The reason I began to take it was to help with exactly the issues that we're talking about. I was hesitant at first because there's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of misinformation about it. There's also a little bit of a machismo thing of like trying to do this yourself and not wanting help. But I felt the same way about therapy until I was like, this would probably help me. So I think SSRI is a good option. It's not for everybody. You shouldn't feel that you must be on a medication. But I think that if you're struggling and you're looking for something that could help, it's great to just, consult with a prescribing doctor, particularly somebody who really specializes in these types of issues and these types of medications. Make sure you feel very comfortable with your options, understand your options. But my thoughts are anything that helps is wonderful, and SSRIs can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point about talking about it with your doctor. I know that the podcasts and the TikTokers out there, we love sharing our opinions and our tips and tricks. But that's actually one thing that I don't personally share. I would never give anyone advice about medication except for talk to your doctor, for example, because it's so different for every single person. And the medication that one person takes could do wonders, but someone else might take that same medication and react in a different way. So it's, for me, it's so important to talk, with the doctor about it and understand what the options are. Just as you said, what are your options? Why? And also they need to know your medical history, because to know,
Yes,
maybe you have
yes, they have
you're
to know your
taking another
medical
medication
history.
and there's interactions. Yeah. So for me, it's just so important not to do the TikTok. So that was like the perfect answer, I think, as well,
Oh,
and
thank you.
good to
Yeah,
hear
and
about the experience.
look, also for yeah, just for anxiety and panic, there's no one size fits all solution, right? For me, the combination of therapy and medication was quite helpful. That doesn't mean that it's the same combination for everyone. So, yeah, I think you have to be a good advocate for yourself, and just work to discover what your supports are, what's going to work for you.
Exactly, and we're all just trying, and it's one of those things. Some people are terrified of the idea of being on medication forever. Some people, again, you said the machismo thing about not wanting to depend, let's say, depend in quotes on something. But if you're suffering, if there's something that's going to help you or can potentially help you, maybe it'll help you for a while. Maybe you change, or you can come off in the future as you learn the different skills and get that psychoeducation, or maybe it's something that's helpful long term. So it's so personal, and for each individual, and yeah, I'd say for
And of
everyone
course,
listening, just
I won't be able to find the page, but I do have there is a page in the book that shows some common misconceptions about medication. It's not in any way
yeah.
promoting medication, but it's just to review a few of the common misconceptions.
But it's true. But even we have misconceptions on there's people that are very, very anti-medication. Some people, I've actually seen people that are 100% pro. You need to take, if you have anxiety disorder, you need to take medication. I've had people in my comments saying, even on a video where I told the story about how I was taking medication but still was having panic attacks and things, and someone in the comments said, "This is your fault. You didn't take your meds." but I did take it. So there's always online. There's going to be so many perspectives and opinions, but yeah, it's I definitely think that's Camille. I hope that was answering your question. Let's see if there's any more questions actually while we're here. Oh, this is great question, I think. Let's see. Camille says, "Thank you for the answer." That's fantastic. How did you get to the state where you could go out and walk and having these symptoms? As my problem is I can't get my thinking or body to believe it's just anxiety/panic when it's happening. Yet when I'm okay, I believe it. It's like there's two different versions of me. I can totally relate to that. I'll just say before you answer, there are times where I 100% there was like different versions of me. The one that's in panic, especially if it's been a while since I've had a panic attack, for example, I couldn't imagine being the person that could have panic attacks. And then when I'm having panic attacks and anxious, I couldn't imagine being someone that's not. It's almost like completely different states. But yeah, so how did you get to the state where you could walk about having symptoms, and about the kind of thinking when you can't believe that it's just anxiety and panic?
Wow, yeah, that's a really profound question, and I'm glad that I'm glad that you're talking about walking, because I'll give you an example about that exact thing. When I was really going through panic, I had a dog that I loved, a little Boston Terrier. I loved him. He was such a wonderful dog. And I really enjoyed walking him and taking him to different trails for hikes. But when I was in that panic loop that I was in, I had told myself that if I walk this dog, something terrible will happen to me. I will have a stroke or a heart attack or an aneurysm, and I'll just be, just left there, and something horrible will happen. And what I started to do, and this is going to sound really oversimplistic, but I started to sort of shorten the walk. Like I would say to myself, okay, I just want to take him and I want to just go 1 block, and then I'm going to turn around and come back. I would start to create small versions of safety within the activity that I liked, if that makes sense. And I was almost doing like a little bit of exposure, expose myself to the thing. Like, this does scare me. I'm going to do it in a way that, like, if I only go a block, I can still see my house, and maybe that can feel safe. And if I can do that, even though it would sometimes be anxious, I would be anxious during it, but I could get back to my house easily. And then maybe I would go 1.5 blocks, and maybe I would go 2 blocks. So what I did, and this isn't really a therapeutic modality, I just tried to find small versions of safety within the activity that I really desired to do, but that panic was keeping me from doing. I knew that I was, quote, better. I'll use that term very lightly, but I knew that I was better. I was doing better when I could walk him again, and I could go around, the whole neighborhood, and I wasn't so concerned that something terrible was going to happen. I don't know if that quite answers the question. I know it's not really a clinical answer, but it's something that did help me. And I'll just add to that, the painful part of it was I knew that anxiety and panic were robbing this activity of me, and that bothered me. And I wanted to have that activity back.
That's I think that's the huge point about being robbed of the things you want to do. And part of me was almost like, well, that's the sacrifice I have to be safe, is to not have fun and to. But people say,
right,
well, you're worried about dying, but you're not living, right? And it actually took me a long while to almost get to such a low point that, you know what, I actually am not living at all, that I am going to let myself have some risk. And I don't think it's about just going and having all the, just ripping the Band-Aid and going on a big adventure. My dad used to say, you know what, I wish I could just drop you off in the middle of a jungle, then you'll be cured. And maybe that's true, you have to survive. But it doesn't have to be that way, because as you did, you can take those steps step by step, and you can. I think there's this idea. I think that I have like conflicting thoughts about the idea of feeling safe. So sometimes I think, no, I don't care about feeling safe. It doesn't matter to me. I just need to do, and I can handle it. That's what I need to learn. But then at the same time, safety is this innate thing. Becoming a parent, I've just realized how, yes, you need some resilience, and there needs to be some negative stuff that you get through. But actually, it is very important that everyone has the sense of safety, right? Because whether you think that the world isn't safe at all or this and that, we create safety with each other, don't we? And you create safety with yourself. You make yourself, what you did was finding your sense of safety to the point where you believed, I think, that you can be safe. And then you learned that you can do more and go further, right? So you use the safety to your advantage, not just a crutch, if that makes sense. So I don't know.
But I had to start using it in that. But I had to start using it in that smaller way, right? Like, your dad's thing of dropping you in the middle of the jungle, like that would be like me in that example with the dog, saying to myself, you know what, like, I'm sick of this. I'm going to just take myself to a secluded trail in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to just go for like a 6-hour hike in there. That would not have been good for my anxiety or my panic. And the other thing is, you have to be kind to yourself. So I had to be able to say to myself, if I walked a 1/2 block and I was okay, that's a win. I don't care if, it's only a 1/2 block. I got to say that's a win. And that starts to build back my sense of safety.
That's the biggest thing for me is, and I think people, when talking about, let's say, exposure therapy, I think people think, and I've seen this misconception a lot that, oh, so how do I do exposure therapy? Because every time I try, I have a panic attack and I fail. And it's like, that's the wrong outlook, because the point is, actually, it's probably good that you had a panic attack, because you're able to show yourself that you're okay and sit with it and keep going. So even the fact that you did it, that's a good thing. You tried, you pushed yourself, you sat with, let's say, the sensations. There's no such thing as failing in exposure therapy. Failing, you could say, might be never giving anything a go and letting the anxiety control your life forever, right? So do you agree with that? Have you found this misconception that the idea of
Yeah,
tackling anxiety
I
is
agree
to
with that,
go out and do it perfectly?
yeah, I think that that's a recipe for more anxiety. Now, I don't think we should be completely avoidant, but at the same time, I don't think we should thrust ourselves into the middle of a situation that brings up a negative stimulus for us. A great starting point is actually imaginal exposure. Imagining yourself, if you have a fear of or an anxiety or panic around going to a busy store, or a busy shopping area, imagine yourself doing that and having it turn out okay. Imagine yourself going on that walk and having it be okay. This is something that I recommend a lot to people who don't like to fly on airplanes, and I'm one of them. So imagining yourself getting on the airplane and it going okay, and the flight is okay and you're okay, can actually, it's like if the mind can accept that it's safe, then the body will follow. The body will accept that it's safe. And the body's only having these panic responses because of what the mind is signaling to it.
That's the imaginary exposure you're talking about. I think we were doing a session in the community the other day. I think Kelvin was there, who's in the audience now. And I was talking about how I used to do this. I used to do 30 minutes. I think it was 20 or 30 minutes. And again, I think you mentioned you had your first panic attack driving. And when I was fully agoraphobic, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't leave the house, anything. And I started driving again. But I could get in the car and I could drive for like 2 seconds and then I'd panic and get out. And so I begun doing these close my eyes for 20 minutes and imagine driving, doing the same thing, going to the end of the road, having the biggest panic attack ever, crashing the car, to bring up all those feelings, and just allow them to be there without even doing it. And I actually found that extremely helpful, because when I did go and I did start feeling the symptoms, it was like I'd been there before and I'd been okay, even though I hadn't. So I find that really powerful and interesting. And I haven't heard it talked about too much. We always talk about exposure in terms of, go and do something and go to the supermarket when you're scared. But you can start right at home.
That's it. Because that might not always be reasonable. I think at the point I'm talking about in my life, like my panic was so acute and so constant that I don't think it would have been reasonable for me to, go to this trail out in the middle of the woods and just throw myself into it. I think that would have really made things worse. It would have compounded the issue. So, look, we have to start where we are. And be reasonable with ourselves as far as what we expect ourselves to do. I worked with a client who had a highway driving phobia, and we talked about just going from getting on a highway and going from one exit to the next, and just starting there. We didn't talk about getting on the highway and driving all the way, 50 miles. We talked about a matter of a mile and starting there and feeling safe and going from there and building on it.
Yeah, and driving is, I think that's the tough one, because you believe that you're dangerous, or you believe that the panic is going to cause you to crash or things like that. I found I did driving exposure with my therapist over the phone, and the funny story is we would go on the phone, I start driving, and every day I would do a longer distance. And I remember doing one of the exposures, driving, and I got to the point where I could do it pretty good on the phone. It's kind of a safety behavior, but I feel that's okay at the point when you can't do anything to have support, right? To be able to help you to do that. And I don't know if maybe she did it on purpose, but I went under a bridge going the direction to, the outwards direction. So going further away. So the anxiety building. And as I was driving, the phone, I went under the bridge, and it wasn't a big bridge or a tunnel. The phone hung up, boop, boop, boop. And I had the surge of adrenaline. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to crash the car. I'm going to die. I'm going to run someone over. And I was at the red light, and it's just the massive panic attack. I was unbelievably strong panic attack. And I was like, this is it. I was fully agoraphobic at this point, and I couldn't go anywhere, do anything. So add to the fact that I was driving in a car, I was also in the middle of nowhere, and I barely know where I was, and I didn't know who I was going to go to. It was absolutely like being put in the jungle. And the reason I'm talking about this is because what happened? Well, I was at the lights. I saw the lights were red, and I was like, there's a gas station, or in the UK we would say petrol station, but my mom's American, so yeah. And there was a station there behind me, and I looked, I did all the checks, and I just went. I did everything like I was in a driving lesson, and I looked. I did a 3-point turn at the lights. I knew no one was coming. I drove amazingly, parked into the gas station, had a panic attack, went to the person, said there, hey, can you help me? I'm having a panic attack. Guy in the station didn't know what I was talking about. He was just he had no clue what I was talking about. So I found some people, and they understood. It was a terrible panic attack. I called the ambulance. Everything it was terrible. Anyway, the story is the therapist was trying to call me as I was on the phone with the ambulance, and I started to be like, I don't want to do this. I said, guys, I'm going to be okay. I don't need an ambulance. I need to keep working on my exposure. And got it back in the car, got on the phone. And the reason I tell this story is because I thought that I would be unsafe and not able to handle it. I drove better than I did in my life while I felt like I had no control, right? I believed that I had no control. I thought I was losing control. I thought I kind of didn't know what was going on, but I drove better, and I was so, meticulous about what I was doing. And I made it to where I needed to go. And I realized at that point, even though it was a bit traumatic, that even when I'm at the height of a panic and it feels like I'm going to lose control, I don't think it does mean that I'm going to lose control. And I'm actually quite good control. And I'm probably more aware than if I wasn't panicking. I don't know if you can relate to that aspect.
I can relate to that in that I've had moments of panic while I've been in a session with a client, and I'm in the middle of a session, and I call them, and I use this terminology in the book, I call them flare-ups. Like I'll have a slight flare-up. Oh, yeah. Like I'll feel a panicky symptom, like I'll feel dizzy. And I have been able, and this took time, but I've been able to be like, okay, I know what that is. I don't want that to be happening right now. It is happening right now, but I'm okay. And I'm going to be okay. And then I can really refocus back into the moment. And, I think that's something else that people who are struggling with panic have to understand, is that you're never really going to completely eradicate it, but that's okay. If you start to look at it more as something that, it can be somewhat chronic, but can be managed. I became so much more reasonable with myself when I started to look at it that way, because I think all those trips to the hospital, all that, doctor Googling, all that stuff was a way to just get rid of this completely. And I had to come to a point where I was like, look, and I had a therapist tell me, he was like, you have to recognize that you are never going to completely get rid of all your anxiety. And that was a very, very important thing for me to hear. I didn't look at it as a death sentence. I looked at it as, okay, well, I also have chronic back pain, which is true. And I know how to manage that. And I know what to do with that when it flares up. And I don't think I'll ever get rid of it completely, but I can be okay.
Yeah. And even just realizing that and knowing it gives a bit of that the yearning for that to get rid of the uncertainty, and it gives you, takes some responsibility off, because to be honest, we do need to have a little bit of anxiety as well. If we didn't have anxiety at all, then that actually wouldn't be good. So realizing that anxiety itself isn't necessarily the enemy was also a big thing that helped me to actually, this is going to sound weird probably, but be comfortable when I am anxious or when I have anxiety. And that's a whole different feeling, as being able to be anxious and comfortable with it at the same time. Because previously it was only being anxious and uncomfortable and in torture. I think we have, there's one more, there's a few questions, but I think I see one that could be quite interesting. This is good, yeah. How do you not care about external perspectives of others and focus more on your own perspective? This is a huge issue for me, for social anxiety, where I get dizzy, vision delayed, etc. But if I manage to focus on my own perspective and my own body, usually a few seconds, the anxiety seems to be gone. But I keep falling back into checking environment / other people, plus how I come across. I'll do a quick answer for this one. Is I've just well, it's not really an answer. It's just, for me, having the public panic attacks like the one I talked about, it just put me in a place where I was at the mercy of everyone's opinions and people looking at me, and I just got used to it. I just got used to it, and then I was so worried about dying that I was like, who cares if I get embarrassed? I'm gonna die. so now for me, I'm very happy to show videos of my panic attacks online, because in those moments I just felt like I was going to die, and I couldn't care less what anyone thought anymore. But at the beginning I did care, and I know that's not a good answer, but that's just my experience. But I'd love to hear, Phil, from you, because I'm sure you have a much more productive and useful answer than me.
Well, I think yours was useful. Mine's a little different, but I think yours was certainly useful. Something I would remind myself is that, of course, something I would remind myself is that we all have ego, and our ego is that part of us that's almost surveilling ourselves. So as much as you might feel that others are surveilling you, there's a much greater possibility that they're surveilling themselves, and they are thinking about how they're appearing to others and what their optic is. And I think that when you start to embrace the idea that most people are really they're focusing inward, not outward, it takes some of the pressure off of you. When I was going through severe anxiety, I used to freak out about, like, are people judging me by like what I'm putting in my shopping cart at the grocery store? Like I would sort of have those thoughts, which I think are common anxiety thoughts, until I started realizing, like, no, they're looking at their shopping carts and they're not paying any attention to what I'm doing. So I think part of that is maybe just a reframe on the assumption that we make that others are always watching us, or that we're always being surveilled. In psychology, there's a concept called ideas of reference, which is, it's a thinking distortion. It's a cognitive distortion where we mistakenly believe that things reference us when they don't. It's not it has nothing to do with narcissism or anything like that. It's really anxiety driven. So being able to remind yourself, not everything references me, and that's great, because I don't want everything to reference me, might be very helpful. So I wonder if maybe just some different self-talk, a different way to kind of just reframe this might be helpful.
Do you know what there's a term for realizing that other people have lived experiences like you? It's like you're on a bus and you look at someone else, and then you suddenly realize, oh wait, they are like conscious and having a full life and having experiences. There's a certain term for this, and I think the reason I want to talk about it is because that is something that also helps me with basically what you said, which, when I'm going somewhere and maybe I'm worried someone might notice me being anxious or think I'm weird or, think badly of me, they are probably thinking something in their head or experiencing something, or where seeing some guy over there have a panic attack is going to be they won't even the least of their concern, because they're so focused on what's wrong with them, or what's going on in their life, or maybe it's they are having experience, and the fact that you feel so much, as the fact that I or you or whatever feel thinking about other people is like just proof that that's what other people no thinking about yourself, no think about what other people are thinking about you. That's just the proof that the other person is thinking about what other people are thinking of them. And obviously, yes, some people are more confident, or yeah, yeah. um I've just googled the word, just because it bothered me so much. Sonder. So Kelvin said theory of mind, but I know that one because that's like when children, they don't realize that other people even are conscious or think. So if you take a ball, if you show a child a ball and you take it, put it in a box, they assume that someone who walks into the room knows it's in the box, because that's what they know. They think that anything they know is anyone has. That's the theory of mind. When they've developed the theory of mind, they realize that, oh wait, that person came in and they didn't see it go in the box, so they don't know it's in the box. When they can do that, that's the theory of mind. But Sonder, is the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. Because we already have the theory of mind, we know all people are, they know things. But this is that intense realization that everyone else is as deep as you. They're not just characters, they are you, and that's what apparently Sonder. So that's really interesting. Just but that does apply for me when I realize that person is not a robot who is just let me find someone to laugh at. They are so complex, and
Yeah.
they are thinking the same. They have the same tortures and horrors in their head, probably worrying the same things that you do, and that is probably one of the key things that why I don't worry about anyone else. Also, because even if someone does rarely, think badly or have a laugh at me or something, or find, oh, that person had panic attacks was ridiculous, a lot of the time there's something under the surface that they're very scared of, or that is even fueling that kind of reaction, um, or insecurity or things like that. So that wouldn't bother me as well, because I would be more concerned about, I hope you're okay, right?
Mm.
It's a bit
Yeah,
deep.
I love that. I mean, what you just said is yeah, what you just said is so fascinating. Yeah, just remembering that everybody else lives a very complex life, just as you do. So they're probably focusing on their own complexity. I think that's so true. And then, yeah, you're right. Sometimes it might just be projection. Projection is the psychological defense mechanism of I feel some kind of way about myself. I don't like that way I feel about myself, so I project it onto you. It's not a very positive defense mechanism.
Oh no. Well, I think I could go on for days. I think I'm really enjoying the discussion, and I think there are so many things we could talk about and topics to get into, especially if you're having such a kind of similar experiences. I didn't go on to become a therapist, but I am doing this, talking to therapists. So, and have the community and stuff for people to come to.
Yeah.
But so I think that interesting points is a good place to end it. But I want to just ask you, where can we find more about you, maybe your website, and where can we find the books, specifically Overcoming Panic and Panic Attacks by Phil Lane, and Understanding and Coping with Illness Anxiety as well. So if you see these, probably going to be blurry, but these two books by Phil, who actually very kindly sent me them as well before our conversation. So I really appreciate that. I probably will do an actual, let's say, review. So maybe there's a YouTube video coming up soon to talk about the books, if that's okay with you. But I think that would be really good because, with this community as well, I want to share the things that are useful and that help. So I'm going to keep my thoughts hidden for now. And maybe we'll have another conversation if we're up for it, and maybe I'll actually do a bit of a review. But to my question, where can we find these books? And more about you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I would love any free promotion that I can get. So anything you would like to do as far as the books, I completely appreciate it. You can visit my website. It's www.phil-lane.com, and I'm also on Instagram at therapist_Phil. I post a lot of different stuff there, a lot of stuff about mental health and anxiety, all those kinds of things. My website has the books and links to buy the books, so probably my website is your best bet for info on the books.
Awesome, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope we can do this again, because I think we definitely got a lot to talk about. Camille said this was very interesting. Massive thanks. And I agree. I definitely learned a lot, and I didn't actually know about the 4. What did you call them? The 4. What's the phrase? The vestibular
subtypes.
Subtypes. The 4 subtypes. I hadn't thought about or necessarily seen it, but I know you mentioned it in the book and today. So that's something definitely that I've learned. I just kind of thought it was just a horror. It's just panic attacks are just one horror show that didn't bother to break it down.
Right.
But yeah, so thank you so much, and thank you everyone in the audience, if you're watching in the community, for joining us live. You provided some really amazing questions. This has been the Anxiety Fitness podcast with Phil Lane, and me, Peter Rupert, also known as Anxiety Fitness as well. And that's it from us. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.